Most of us, if not all of us, have bad habits that we'd just like to get rid of. But how often do you think about good habits that you haven't formed yet, especially in the garden? Today, I'll talk about 7 gardening habits that I really think you should acquire. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott. Dictionary.com says that a habit is an acquired behavior pattern, regularly followed until it becomes almost involuntary. And that's the case with so much that we do in the garden. I have many habits, the things that I do every single day. And I'm not talking about the things that you need to do to take care of your plants, the normal actions like watering. That's not a habit. That's something you have to do just to keep your plants alive. No, instead, it's the other things that are part of gardening, that if you do them on a regular basis, you will have more success. The first good habit of gardening is to document everything. Everything you try, everything you do, everything you build, you should have a record of it. I have before and after pictures of my gardens and of individual plants going back more than 20 years. These videos are one way that I use to document my garden. Whatever your preferred method, you should keep track of everything. And you've probably heard me say before that you should have a garden journal. And in that garden journal, you can keep track of many different things. I discovered something really cool as I put together this part of the video about documentation. I encourage that you start a garden journal, and I've been doing this for years. So to prepare for this video, I got a pad of paper because I often just write things on a pad of paper, but I also got the very first journal that I ever started. And as I looked at my very first entry, well, it ties directly to my garden today. This was a gift from my wife, and the very first entry was the 25th of May in 2002. On that day, I planted rhubarb, I planted asparagus, and I planted some large leaf basil. Well, normally this might just be an average entry, but as I moved to new houses and started new gardens, I always propagated the rhubarb that was growing in my garden. And today, the rhubarb that I have can be traced back to these 3 plants that I put in on the 25th of May, 2002. And why this is special? Well, over the years, I've forgotten what the variety was, but I have it written right here. So I now know that I'm growing Victoria rhubarb right now in my garden because I documented it almost 20 years ago. Another good habit is to plan. Always plan. Every single time I come to the garden, I'm planning something new. I'm looking at my beds, I'm looking at my plants, I'm looking at the sky, the landscape, everything around me to figure out what I'm going to do next. And beyond that, and beyond that. I have many videos about planning gardens because this is something that's critical. Now, you can look at the calendar and say, on this date, I'm going to plan these things. That's one of the suggestions that I have as far as planning out your gardening season. But this is more of a, just look around. Think about what you want to try, what you want to do different, what you want to do the same, and put it down. It gets back to that documentation habit. When you come up with ideas of something you want to try in your garden, well, write it down so you don't forget it and that you really do try it. Here's one of the ways I approach garden planning and why it's become a habit for me. I keep a notebook or pad of paper next to my chair, and as I see new things about gardening or come up with a new idea, I'll jot it down so that when it comes time to actually plan out my garden for each season, well, I have a bunch of notes that I can refer to, like this list of flower bulbs that I did a whole year ago when I was choosing what kind of bulbs I would put in my garden. I selected a couple of these, but this is a long list that I just put together that shows how much they were going to cost, how high the flower stock was going to grow, the varieties, where I could buy them. And then when it came time to act and put a plan together, Well, I had some of this in my notes. I did the same thing with garlic. When I was choosing my garlic this last year, well, I have these notes that tell about all these different varieties and the flavors. So when I ultimately bought some garlic, well, I referred to this list. It's not hard to do, and because I've always got this at my fingertips, I can just reach over, jot down a note, and when it comes time to figure out exactly what my garden is going to look like, well, there's a whole bunch of information in here. It's just a habit that I keep track of my thoughts. Saving seeds is one of those gardening tasks that starts off as something you plan to do because you want to grow that same plant in the future, but it can easily become a habit. I've saved so many seeds over the years that I really don't even plan on doing it much anymore, except when I choose the varieties that I'm going to grow. Like in this bed, I showed in some of my earlier videos all of the turnips I had growing that ended up flowering to the point that I saved the seeds. Well, I didn't plan on saving turnip seeds last year. Instead, I just grew turnips, but I got behind in the harvest and some of them started to bolt and they set up the flower stalks and I just let them grow to the point that I was collecting seeds. I do that with my flowers, I do it with many of my vegetables. It's just a habit that I've gotten into. Sure, some of the plants are planned for the purpose of saving their seeds, but I just really find it enjoyable to just let nature run its course, and then I can benefit at the end with the seeds that I save. Even with some hybrid plants that I know won't bear true, and I may never even plant those new hybrid plants. I just like seeing the plants grow to the point. I learn so much about how they flower and set seed just by making it a habit of seeing the whole process in action. Collecting seeds can be easy and requires almost no thought at all. When I'm out in the garden and I see that seeds are ready to collect, I just grab a paper bag or a plastic bag and get the seeds. There might be a little bit extra work, like separating the seeds from a pod, but the basic activity just happens. It's a habit that I like doing. I can figure out what to do with these seeds later, but I've started the process by collecting them. One of the reasons I like gardening so much is that there's just so much to learn, and I love learning about everything, especially gardening. I've been doing this for decades, and I know that there is so much that I don't know that I need to keep studying and keep learning, and that's the next habit that I suggest you acquire. It's to study and learn about gardening on a regular basis. I used to dedicate an hour or two every morning specifically for the purpose of learning more about gardening. And now it's a habit. I don't even think about doing it. Once I turn on my computer and check my emails and see what else is new in the world, I immediately go to some source, be it a video or a blog or some university study to learn more about gardening. It's a habit. I don't even realize I'm doing it sometimes until I pick up some new critical information that I didn't even know existed until I searched for it. I made that effort to learn. These are the gardening books that I've read in just this last month, and you'll see some of these again in future videos because the information is just so good, and I learned a lot of new things. I bought some of them, but don't think that you have to spend a lot of money to learn. These two are on loan from Frank, a gardening buddy of mine. Great information. And I can't tell you how many dozens and dozens of websites I've gone to learn more, and then the dozens of videos that I've watched. It's so easy to learn now that there's no reason you shouldn't be doing it. And I just really like curling up with a good book, reading a catalog, watching a video, and in the end, I'm learning more about gardening. And that ties in closely with the next habit that I suggest you develop. It's to experiment. Experiment all the time. It's such a habit with me that I don't even think of it as experimenting. I just think of it as gardening. It's something that gardeners should do. try something different and see what happens. Like with these carrots. Normally carrots are a biennial plant. They'll grow in the first year, over winter, and then in the second year they'll flower and set seed. Well, it was a really rough summer for me, dry and hot, and some of these carrots in their first year bolted and sent up their flower stalks. Well, I'm experimenting to see what happens with these particular carrots. I could have pulled them, but I know that the roots are very small because all the energy went into this plant. Why? Because I experimented by pulling some of the plants. And now these, I want to see what happens. I want to see how naturally the carrots will reseed from these little flower umbels. And maybe I'll have a whole bunch of new purple carrots growing here next year. And maybe I won't, but I allowed some of them to grow as part of experimenting. And you can do this at every opportunity. If you see something that you're unsure of or you'd like to know more about, well, just let the plants stay. Let them seed. Let them grow. Wait to harvest for an extra 2 or 3 months and see how the fruit differs. There's just so many different ways that you can experiment without even thinking about it. And if you do it regularly enough, it becomes a habit. These are some of the wood chips that I collected over the fall with the intent of spreading them throughout my garden. Mulch has so many benefits to the soil and the plants that it is an activity that you should be doing. Now, I use wood chips in areas like behind me where I have all my fruit trees growing, and it was part of the plan to mulch that entire area. I also use mulch like straw and leaves and grass in my vegetable garden, and I've collected bags of those as well. It's part of the plan. It's part of normal good gardening practices. But because I do it so regularly, it's now a habit. If I see a bare spot, my initial reaction is, oh, I need to mulch that. And then I just go to one of my bags or my pile and I spread some mulch. It's such a great thing to do that it should become a habit. You should be like me. If you see a bare spot, the first thing you should think about is, well, I need to cover up that soil. And mulch is how you do it. This next habit should be relatively easy to develop, but I think a lot of gardeners really need to work at it because we're so focused on all the chores and the tasks that we too often forget to celebrate gardening. And this is why I think it should be a habit, because gardening should be fun. You should enjoy all of the aspects of gardening, and you should learn to celebrate it. How you celebrate is completely up to you. I usually just talk to myself, or I'll get my camera out and record it, or I'll write it in a garden journal. There's lots of ways to celebrate the first hummingbird of summer, or the very first sprout of spring, or that harvest that you've been waiting to reach. There are so many things that happen in the garden to celebrate that we really should take a little time to identify for ourselves how special all those moments are. When I see a bee on a flower collecting pollen, I celebrate by stopping and looking at the bee and maybe even getting my camera and taking some video of it, because that's a really special event. Sure, it's happening hundreds, if not thousands of times a day all around us in the garden. But to be up close and personal with a bee, well, I celebrate it to myself, and I'll often talk to the bee. I'll make it an event, and I do it so often that it really is a habit. Now, you don't have to speak to bees. That's just something I do. I speak to all the animals in my garden. I speak to butterflies and birds. I certainly know they're not going to respond, but they're as much a part of the garden as I am. So I might as well share some of my time with them because I enjoy doing it. The same as all of these other habits. Altogether, they help make gardening special, which is why I like doing them without even thinking about it, and why I wanted to share the list with you today. And if you want to continue on your gardening journey to learn more and do some of that extra learning, well, maybe click on one of these Gardener Scott videos next. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.